Now, when it comes to the last Skylanders lore video that I have posted on the channel, one of the biggest things about it was the absence of a certain Skylander, or at least the video that I posted as of writing the script. Now, the big topic of that video was wrapping up Skylanders from Swap Force and talking about the stealthier aspects of them. And just from that summary alone, you could probably guess which Skylander I was referring to, and that Skylander is Stealth Elf. Now, when it comes to Stealth Elf, she would have been perfect for a video like that, except for one problem. She has so much stuff attached to her that if I added her to the video instead of Tidepool, that video would have never come out. Now, the reason I say this is because Stealth Elf has a history of being absolutely everywhere and nowhere at once. And by that, I mean she has so many cameos and appearances across the Skylanders franchise that I would literally have to go on a goddamn scavenger hunt just to find them all. And I'm still not convinced that I found absolutely everything. And because of this, there's a ton of stuff that I want to talk about. So for this video, we're going to do something a little different. I will be going off the wiki's recounting of events when it comes to her involvement in Spyro vs. the Mega Monsters, since frankly put, I do not have the time to read a 160-page book on top of all the other sources with the limited time I have. And I will be skipping over the Chaos Trap, which I covered here. But if you want to go read the Mega Monsters story, I suggest you go over to Internet Archive if you want to look at Stealth Elf's involvement along with the rest of the story. There's also a site called Read All Comics where you can also find the rest of these stories as well, but I won't link them in the description yet since I don't know if I can. But with all that said and done, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at Stealth Elf's history throughout the Skylanders franchise and see what we can find. So without further ado, let's get started.
Silent but deadly.
Now, when it comes to Stealth Elf's early life, like where she was born or who her parents were, we don't really know about any of that, and neither does she. The earliest memory that she really has is when she was a small child waking up in the middle of a forest after she had a nightmare about stampeding sheep. She literally had zero memory prior to her finding herself in the forest, so with a soft sniffle and a sigh, she set off in search for answers, and after walking for several days by herself, she would stumble across a gnarled, stumpy-looking creature with lightning moves of a ninja master. And this creature was Forrester. Now, Forrester was the guardian of the forest that the two were currently in, and he had trained in the ancient art of stealth before meeting her. But after sensing her skill for sneaking around, he would not only take her in, but he would also make her his apprentice. But this is where we encounter a really confusing part of the story that I was not expecting to come across. Now, in Imaginators, we meet a character in the enchanted elven forest named Grandmaster Camouflage, who is stated to be her old master. Yet she wasn't brought up anywhere prior to this, and I know that I'm not wrong because in each variation of her backstory, her master is always referred to as a he, not a she, so it has to be Forrester. The only real explanation I could really speculate is that over the years that she spent training, Camouflage would drop in a couple of times and teach her her own tricks. And the more that I think about it, the more I wonder if they all actually live in the same forest. Anyways, because of her extra training and her being a natural, she got to the point where she was basically running laps around Forrester. So once her training was complete, Forrester would invite Master Eon to come and take a look, and Stealth Elf basically knocked his socks off with her abilities, and she would be made a Skylander on the spot. But due to the runtime of this video, this isn't where her story ends. From what I understand, her next appearance happens before the games in a book called Spyro vs. the Mega Monsters, and before we hop into it, I once again implore you all to go read it yourself since I'm going off the wiki for time reasons. After an investigation in Stinky Swamp, Stealth Elf returned to the Citadel to tell Master Eon about a monster that was lurking around within it, and after relaying the information, she was tasked by Eon, along with Spyro, to go back and figure out what was going on. On their way there, they would eventually encounter and save a Mabu by the name of Snuckles, who explained afterwards that he was looking for his friend Nort who had gone missing in the swamp, and after the explanation, they would be attacked by an unnaturally large itchy toad, which also increased the potency of its toxic saliva. I know some of you are questioning why that detail is important, but the reason why is because it was able to send both Stealth Elf and Spyro to sleep, which left poor Snuckles to the mercy of the toad. But just before he could be eaten, however, he would be saved by, surprisingly, Chaos, who used a magic staff to defeat the creature. Now, Spyro would come to first, and he obviously downed the whole good guy act, but Chaos would go on to renounce his evil ways right then and there, which Stealth Elf was able to overhear due to her waking up at the same time, and after he left, they were both stuck there in utter disbelief. Weirdly enough, this wasn't a one-time occurrence either, because after this event, Chaos would continue to save residents of Skylands from these giant creatures and monsters, and he would gain a bit of a reputation from it as well. But turning back to the Skylanders, Stealth Elf would sit out a mission with Spyro, Jetvac, and Drill Sergeant, who would go on to help a molekin called Diggs escape another mega monster attack. She would swap in for Jetvac, however, when they were called to help the warrior librarians of the Eternal Archives, who were under one of the many giant monster attacks, but this one would be very, very different. While they were combating the monsters once again, Chaos would make his appearance and completely drop his hero act. In actuality, he was responsible for the mass outbreak of giant monsters in the first place because he wanted to test out his wand, and trick people into thinking that he wanted to save them, just so he could use it all to blackmail the librarian of the archives, Wiggleworth. And the reason why? Well, he wanted a forbidden book that was within the archives. That's right, all of these monster attacks, all of this feigning to be a good guy, all of this nonsense was over an ill-fated plan to steal a book. I mean, at that point, he should have just sicked the monsters on the library the first time and saved himself all this headache. But at this point, Chaos has been known for his overly complicated plans at this point. And shooting himself in the foot, we can't forget about that. During the fight, Stealth Elf would manage to steal Chaos' staff and turn Spyro into a giant as well. But after doing this, Chaos would get it back from her and shrink her to the size of an ant. And probably not liking that she was even smaller than she actually was, Stealth Elf would take one of her daggers and shove it into Chaos' ankle, which caused him to drop the staff and gave Drill Sergeant the chance to destroy it, which returned Spyro and Stealth Elf to their normal sizes, allowing the three to defeat the Chompies and drive Chaos away. Now, after this point, Stealth Elf would make another appearance in the Mind Melting cutscene, that is the Super Toy Planet cutscene, but after the events of SWAT Force, she would make an appearance in another story called The Chaos Trap. But if you want to see that one in full, go check out the Pirates video as I cover it there, along with Ripped into Overdrive in this video, because I kinda screwed up my schedule. But we do have one more story that we can cover. Now, the story that I'm going to discuss in particular is this one right here called Arbor Day. And what's interesting about this and a couple of the other micro-series is that apparently these things came in something called the Skylanders Fun Packs near the tail end of Skylanders being sold as toys. And apparently some of these comics were part of or bundled with creation crystals as well. This book specifically was just an absolute pain to try and hunt down because these stories were apparently bundled together at one point, and this one was no different, being bundled with a story called Full Blast. But with all of that said and done, let's get into the story and finally wrap things up. The comic starts out with Spyro training as a ninja, declaring that he would prove himself to be worthy before getting promptly defeated by the training dummy he's sparring with, and after some exposition, it turns out that Stealth Elf is training him and tells him that ninja training takes time, and how it took years for her to figure out everything thanks to her teachers. But as she says this, Amabu runs into the room with an urgent message, and after she reads it, she bolts out of the academy. Sometime later, we find Stealth Elf traversing through the forest she was found in all those years ago, and as most of you can probably tell, she is in her legendary form along with Spyro, even at the beginning of the comic. But we'll spin back to this in just a moment. She searches around the forest, calling out to someone, only for Forrester to pop out of a bush, or well, pop out of his disguise, and explain that Dr. Crankcase created a bulldozer to destroy the entire forest so he can create his own factory. And just as Stealth Elf declares that they could stop him, Crankcase shows up. Stealth Elf tells him that there's no way he's destroying the forest, only for him to pull out a damn permit and tell them that he could do this legally, which Stealth Elf doubts for obvious reasons. Stealth Elf then tells him that there's only one of him and two of them, only for Crankcase to call in reinforcements in the form of these robots, and a fight ensues afterwards. Things are going well for the master-student duo at first before they are overwhelmed and one-tapped by the robots. And by one-tapped, I mean damn, they are definitely going to feel that in the morning. Just as all hope seems lost, Spyro would come flying out of the woodwork and save the two, the three going on to dismantle all the robots before Crankcase steps in and shoots the three with his goo gun. As the three get stuck in the goo, Crankcase tries to run them over before Stealth Elf cuts herself free and deflects his next shot back at him, sticking him to his vehicle as she quickly leaps on and shuts it down. And as Spyro and Forrester pull themselves out of the goo, Stealth takes a good look at the permit again and realizes what most of us have probably guessed. The permit was fake as hell. And after some compliments and some banter, the comic comes to an end. Now, when it comes to this comic specifically, the only question I really have is, well, when does this take place exactly? From what we know, the Academy is open, so it has to be sometime after Trap Team. But that just raised the question of how Crankcase was even able to pull all of this off in the first place. And what's crazier is that if that one comic where he raced against Nightmare and those kids meant anything, he was still up to nonsense before or after this, which just raised the question of how the hell did he get out of his trap? Now that I think about it, that's a pretty good question for most of the villains we get to see throughout these comics. We either encounter them in Trap Team, or we've seen them before. Another thing that I'm wondering is why they were in their legendary forms throughout this comic. It's not like they switched it when Stealth Elf took off to the forest, they were just hanging out in them. But with that said and done, I think that's enough for me. Now, I know this video is kinda choppy, but I just cannot work on this damn thing anymore. It has just been a infuriating experience, to say the least, and I really need to get something posted this week. But with all of that said and done, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so it grows the channel, check out the Return to Skyland series, along with the rest of the lore and music down in the description below, and I will see you all in the next one.